Welcome back. In this video, we are going to talk about INotifyPropertyChanged. So about this interface, which allows us to trigger something if a property was changed. And we have seen property changed in the last video when we were using binding, and we're going to do it slightly differently this time. And you will see how to use this interface yourself. So instead of a grid, I want to use a stack panel because I want to stack things up. And I'm going to stack up, first of all, a label, which I'm gonna set the contents to num1. And I'm gonna close this label like that. And below that, I want to have a text box where we can enter a value. So I'm not gonna use a text block, a text box here. I'm gonna close it right away like that. And in the text box, I want to have the width of 100 pixels, a height of, let's say, 30 pixels, and then I want to set the text. Now the text should be bound, so I'm going to use data binding here, and the path that I want to use is going to be num1, and the mode is going to be two-way. So we've seen what this mode means and what this path means. So now let's copy this code and duplicate it here. So I'm gonna copy and paste it twice. So this is going to be num2, same here, and this is going to be result. So this is going to be the result, and this is going to be num3. So now you might wonder, what is this num1, num2, and result? Because, well, we have num1 and num2 and so forth, but these are just contents, they are not names. So in order to connect to them or use them, we need to go into our code behind, because I want to create those in here. So I'm going to create a new class actually, because we're going to use the main window as our program. So similar to our program, but I want to use INotifyChanged. And in order to use this interface, I need to create a new class that can inherit from it. So I'm going to use a new class here, and I'm going to call it sum. Because what I want to do is, if we go back to our XAML file, we have this num1, num2, and num3. And what I want is, if I add a value here and a value there, then the value here at the bottom should automatically be the sum of the two before. All right. So I'm gonna use a new class for that. And this class should inherit from INotifyPropertyChanged. And in order to do, or to use this INotifyPropertyChanged, we need to use the system.component model. So I'm going to using system.component model. So now you can see our interface is green, which is the, well, generally this light green, which is the interface color in Visual Studio. And now I can fix those potential errors. So you see, I need to implement the interface. So I'm going to do that. And as you see, we have this public event property changed, event handler property changed. And now in order to use that, we will need to create a private method called void on property changed, which is going to take in a property. And in my case, this property is going to be a string. And I want to check first if property changed is not empty, so not equal null. Because if that's the case, then I want to go ahead and call the property changed this dot new property changed event args, which I'm gonna hand over the properties. So the property changed event args, as you can see, needs a string property name, and the property name that I want to hand over is the property itself. So on property change, it's going to call this property, and I'm going to enter property in here. All right, so we will simply call this property changed event. And now in order to use all of those, we need to have several properties. And I'm going to start off by creating private fields first. So a private string num1, then a private string num2, and finally a private string called result. And now I create properties for all of those. So I'm going to create a property called num1, and this num1 property should be slightly different than the standard ones. So I'm not going to use this basic get and set. I'm going to use a self-defined. So I'm going to define one myself, and it should not return num1, but it should return, well, not the one with capital, not the property, but actually this field here. So it's going to be returning num1, so return num1. And if I set something, then I want to set the value. By the way, I use string here at the top, so my property should also be strings. So I'm going to return num1. And now if somebody tries to set num1, I want to try to parse that, because what if it's not a number that the user has entered? What if he entered, I don't know, letters or something like that? Then I want to catch that and change it. So I'm going to use int number, and I'm going to create a new bool here, which I'm going to call result is going to be int try parse, and I'm going to try to parse the value, and I'm going to get out the number. So we have seen try parse before. What it simply does is it tries to parse the value that is given into an integer, and if it worked, then it's going to be true, and if it didn't work, then it's going to be false. And by the way, if it worked, then we'll get the number as out as well. So if I can, or if I get a positive value now, I'm just going to say num1 is going to be the value. And also what I want to change or to trigger is the onPropertyChanged, and I'm going to trigger the num1. All right, so I'm going to change this num1 property if the value is changed. Now, what we also can do is just copy that for our second number, so num2, and I'm going to change that to num2. It's also going to be a number, and here it's going to be num2 and there as well. And now finally we need a property for our result, so I'm going to create that public string result, and this one is also going to have a get and a set. So here a get is going to have an result is going to be int.parse num1 plus int dot parse num2. And why can I do that now? Well, because I'm returning num2, and whenever I'm setting num1 and num2, so the ones here, they are integers already, because they're only set, they only have a value if they are a number. Okay, so otherwise they will never be set, they will be empty. And then what we need to go ahead and do is to return something in here. So I'm going to return res.toString, so the result. And now if somebody tries to set the result, I'm simply going to do the following. So set int result is going to be int parse, actually the same thing that we did here, only that we don't return it, but we set it. So result is going to be res_toString. And now in here we call the onPropertyChanged for our result, and the same thing goes for our num2 and num1. So what that does, so this onPropertyChanged, as you can recall, it changes the value of the property. So property changed event args, and it's going to take in the property, and it's going to call this property changed event, and then all of those properties, so the num1 property, the num2 property, and the result one will be notified, and our result should be changed. So what I want to have is every time somebody enters a number, that this num3 is going to be changed as well. And before we can check that or test that, we need to go into our .xaml.cs file and actually create an object of our sum class. So we have created the sum class, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new object. I'm going to create it up here, which is not just going to be an object, it's also going to be a property. So sum object is going to get and set. And now in order to access that, we need to make our sum public as well. So let's make this class public. And now we can go ahead and use the sum object. Now I can set the sum object here at the start, and I'm gonna say it's a new sum with the value of num1 being 1 and num2 just having a value of, let's say, 3. And as you see, we have to use strings here because otherwise, well, it won't work because those properties, they are strings, right? So now what I need to call is, or what I need to set is, set the data context to our sum object, because otherwise nothing will happen. So now let's run this. And there you see, we never set num3, which is the result. And maybe it's even better if we actually call it result. So let's go here and change the label to result, or maybe even sum. So this is going to be the sum. Maybe even something like that of num1 and num2. Okay, so now let's run it again. And there you are. 1 plus 3 is 4. So now let's change it to, let's say, 25. And as you see, it changed. So now let's change the value of 3 to 31. You see 56. Now if I change that value here, you see it's going back to its normal value, because what we did here in the setter, if somebody tries to set the result, we simply set the result to, again, the value of int parse num1 and num2. So it's always going to go back to the actual result if we ever try to set the result of our string result. Okay, so now you can play around with this and you can calculate whatever you want, and you will have real-time answers, well, real-time, well, sums of your two values. You could go ahead and add another one, or you could now go ahead and change that to be a multiplier. But now I know that was quite some setup that we had to do, and so I want to go through it once again real quick with you. So in the XAML file, we had those 3 labels and those 3 text boxes, which are just the UI elements, right? And the text of each of those is connected. So this one has the path to num1, this one has the path to num2, and this one has the path to result. And those are those ones here. So the num1, the num2, and the num3 properties. We created an extra class which is inheriting from INotifyPropertyChanged, which is an interface which has this PropertyChanged event handler, which is an event and which is called PropertyChanged. Now we created a method called onPropertyChanged, which is called each time that one of our properties is changed, and that is done once a property is set. So we have this property num1, and if somebody's trying to set that value of num1, we are simply going to call this onPropertyChanged. And in here we set the property. So we say, okay, give me a property, and we change that property to the value that was given. So it's pretty much we set it, but at the same time we don't only set the one that we are currently setting in terms of in the setter. So we don't only set num1 here, but we also set the result, and we don't set the, and here you see this line here, it sets this field. So it changes this private string field, and this onPropertyChanged actually changes the property itself. So it's going to change the value of the property itself, but at the same time it's going to change the value of the property result. So it's going to update our result each time that we change the value of num1, and the same goes for num2, and the same goes for our result, where I said each time that the result is changed, we want to go ahead and call this onPropertyChanged method as well. Right, so now you see how you can use INotifyPropertyChanged, how you can use this interface, and you can use it in multiple different ways. And it's really interesting to use it whenever any property is changed. So let's say the color is changed and you want to trigger an event that's gonna do some fancy animations, or somebody presses a button which will change a property somewhere in your program, and you want something great to happen afterwards, you can set that all up with this INotifyPropertyChanged interface. What you of course need to do is to create a inheritance correlation here between the class that you're using and INotifyPropertyChanged.